Well, good evening to all of you in La Piranta and good morning from San Francisco. I want to welcome you all to this lecture 2 of our course on the international marketing of high technology products and innovations. I hope you have been enjoying the readings and the videos, and you've also been attempting the quizzes. I just wanted to clarify that sometimes the answers in the quiz may not always be correct, and there's also the issue of context. When you're doing multiple choice questions, it's not always clear what the context is. So our policy in terms of grading the quiz is that if you get 3 out of 5 questions correct, then you get the full points for that quiz. So please do bring to our attention if there is any wrong answers, but again, don't stress about it from the point of view of getting all the points, because if you have 3 out of 5, it's considered an okay performance in the quiz. You'll get the full credit. Okay, now I'm going to go to Moodle. And share my screen with all of you. So I hope you can see this. Here is the agenda for lecture 2. You can see we have 4 important topics corresponding to the chapters in the textbook. Chapter 5 is on partnerships, alliances, and customer relationships. Then we go chapter 6, marketing research. Chapter 7 is on consumer behavior. In chapter 8, we talk about issues in technology and product management. So I'm going to allocate roughly 30 minutes to each of these topics, and I want you to participate actively. You need to raise any issues that were unclear from the readings or the chapters. You can ask for examples, and all of us have the collective responsibility to participate. So the procedure is that you go to the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There should be a chat box, and it's through that you ask any type of question, and then we can read what everybody else is saying. So I'm going to now go to my Google Docs and start with chapter 5. On alliances and partnerships. And I would ask that all of you, anybody who has any topics that they would like to discuss during the lecture today, please go to the chat box and address your questions or comments to everybody in the audience, so we can all benefit from that. So if you had a chance to do the reading or watch the video, we are now on chapter 5 topics, and I want to give you a chance to ask about any topics. Then I will get into some more issues on my own. So there are no issues that you wish to bring up in the chat. I can't see any topics or any questions in the chat yet. Maybe I'll motivate this by going over some of the overheads. So let's go over the basic framework of types of alliances and partnerships. I'm hoping you can see this visual. It has a diagram, types of partnerships, and this can motivate you to focus on the topic. So let's say you're the focal firm in the center there. Okay, I see a question from Brian. Where is the video recording for lecture 1? Because I could not see in the module. So let me address that. Let's go into Moodle and go to lecture 1. And down here, right before the lecture notes, Brian, do you see that video recording lecture 1, 19 September? So that's where the recording is. Thank you for your question. Now I want to go back to this PowerPoint document and talk about alliances and partnerships, and you're welcome to put more questions on this topic in your chat box for all of us. So let's say you're a focal firm in the center. Let's take the example of Apple Computer, just because it's one of my favorite companies and they made some interesting announcements since our lecture 1. All these new products, the iPhone XS, XS Plus, and then the XR. So if you're Apple in the center of this diagram, then you have a number of suppliers. For some of the memory, they rely on suppliers like Samsung. Samsung also provides some of the displays, the OLED displays, which are new in the XS and the XS Plus. And of course, Apple has distributors in so many different countries. I've seen in Helsinki there are Apple dealers or retailers, and then there's the customers, you and me. At the end of this is the vertical supply chain. And then so you can have partnerships with any of the companies in the vertical supply chain. A partnership is a closer agreement than what's called an arm's length relationship. An arm's length relationship is when you do spot transactions just once and you're never going to, do any business again. But partnerships are closer agreements. There's actually contractual obligations, and the contracts could be several years in duration. As well as there are these horizontal partnerships with competitors and with complementors. So, we can take the example of Apple. Not only is Samsung a supplier to Apple, but it's a very serious competitor at the device level. For every model of Apple smartphone, there's an equivalent model of a Galaxy from Samsung. And what are complementors? Complementors are independent companies whose products and services add value to the customers at the end of the vertical chain. So the example I like to use is that when the iPhone 7 came out when the iPhone first came out in 2007, there were so many app developers, and Rovio Angry Birds was a hit game on the first iPhone. So Rovio is a complementor to Apple for the iPhone. So that's an example of a complementor. I'm sorry, it appears that You're not able to see my slides. So let me try this again. Okay. Thank you, Sana, for letting me know that they couldn't see my slides. I assume that you can now see it. So let's go to a question from Sami. About the alliances, are Apple and Samsung in a cooperative relationship or they are purely competitors, meaning they compete with each other in one market and they cooperate in another one? Yes, Sami, you're correct. The latter. They do both. So they compete in the device market, but they do cooperate in terms of the components. And it's very interesting how that works. You know, it goes back many years ago when there's the new CEO of Samsung. He's the grandson of the founder. He's a Harvard trained MBA, and he had a great relationship with Steve Jobs when he was alive. And Jae Yong Lee, the current CEO of Samsung, he actually assured Steve Jobs that there will be a firewall between Samsung's component division and their device division. And he assured that there will be no communication that the managers would have within Samsung across these divisions. They would not share any information. And Steve Jobs trusted him. So this is a very challenging relationship, because on the one hand, Apple is very dependent on Samsung for these components like the OLED screen and the memory, but they also severely compete in the end devices. And of course, Apple does have its reservations. You know, it is looking for alternate suppliers. They've worked with LG and with Sharp in Japan to try to build these OLED display screens, but the fact of the matter is that none of the other companies have the scale and volume to supply Apple's needs. So over time, we will see Apple try to reduce its dependence on Samsung, but for the moment, they continue to be competitors as well as cooperators. So there's a term called co-opetition, which is a cut and merge of two words: cooperation and competition. Co-opetition. That's what Samsung and Apple do. And the trade press also calls them as frenemies, which is a cut and merge of friends and enemies. So you can see that in some markets they are friends, and in some markets they're enemies. So thank you for your question, Sami. And like that, I'm encouraging everybody else to please, if there are any topics that you found interesting or confusing in terms of this chapter 5 on alliances and partnerships, this would be a good time to bring them up. It's definitely the case that vertical partnerships are a little easier to manage than the horizontal ones, because in the vertical supply chain, the interests of all the parties have to eventually be aligned with the customer's needs and values. So everybody in the vertical chain understands that it's the customer's needs that are the most important rather than our individual needs. Whereas if you look at the horizontal complementors and competitors, they also have their independent vertical supply chains, and they're very busy managing those. So it takes an additional management effort to get the horizontal partners to focus on the supply chain of the focal firm. That requires some additional coordination and management. Okay, let's go to some more slides here. Yeah, so you can see this is how the type of alliances will vary across the product life cycle. In the introduction or emergence stage, you have a lot of alliances for product innovation. We've discussed before how the fixed costs of development of a new platform is so high that often partners will want to share in the cost. Hmm? This is especially true, for example, in drugs and pharmaceuticals, where the cost of doing all the clinical trials is so high that different companies might, cooperate and try to reduce the cost of innovation. During this introduction stage, you also want to try to form alliances around industry standards, or you might want to, the startup which has the technology may want to license it out to other players to create the standard. So those are the kinds of alliances important in emergence. Then during growth, you want to expand capacity and you want to fine tune the product. So that's why you might cooperate with companies on R&D to, improve the product functionality or performance, and then licensing and distribution alliances would help to push up the volume in the marketplace. Under maturity now, there's a lot of competition, so you want to reduce the unit cost, and you can do that with process improvements. So you need to improve processes in both manufacturing, marketing, and distribution. And then during the final stage of decline, again, you want to try to consolidate and, form alliances to defend your position in the marketplace. So these are the kinds of alliances that are important at different stages. Is there any example of a recent alliance or partnership that has been in the news that you might have come across? Maybe that's a good point for discussion. Who has seen in the news any example of a recent technology alliance between different companies? Could you share that in terms of the chat box, on the chat box? What are some practical examples of alliances that has caught your attention? Okay, my colleague Sana has put up one where Walmart and Microsoft seem to have a new partnership in retail. I'm going to click on this just to get familiar with the story. Hmm. So I'm going to share this screen with you if I can. Walmart establishes strategic partnership with Microsoft to further accelerate digital innovation in retail. So, Walmart is a big retailer in the US, and they're facing a lot of competition from Amazon. So anything they can do to try to bridge the gap with Amazon would be useful in a competitive sense. So Let's see what they're doing here. Walmart's commitment to technology is centered around creating incredibly convenient ways for customers to shop. Walmart is already using Microsoft services for critical applications and workloads and is now embarking on a broad set of cloud innovation projects that leverage machine learning, AI, and data platform solutions. So, one way for Walmart to be more competitive in terms of cost is to shift many of its applications from enterprise software to cloud-based software. It's a lot cheaper. And so Microsoft has this Azure product, which is cloud-based. And so it appears that they're going to have a long-term contract where Microsoft becomes the preferred supplier of the cloud-based system to Walmart. And of course, that will also have AI capabilities. We know that Amazon is quite far ahead in terms of AI and trying to anticipate what customer needs are and offer them all kinds of recommendations. So maybe this particular alliance is headed in the same direction. So you can see that this is a kind of vertical partnership where Microsoft is the supplier and Walmart is the customer, and it's all aligned by the customer need to want always lower prices and also have these recommendations for what to buy next. We have another one from Amazon and UPS breaking up. Oh, so this would be a good contra example, less successful. So thank you to Mylinem for giving us this link. For a long time, Amazon has used these logistics companies like UPS and FedEx to do the delivery, but now Amazon is getting into building its own fleet for the last mile problem. The last mile is the most expensive to get the product to the consumer's home. And they use UPS and FedEx for that. But now they are ordering their own vans. And so that's a threat to the existing alliances and partnerships they have with UPS and FedEx. So again, what this example illustrates is that alliance or partnership is not forever. It has a time duration, as long as the strategic values and the insights as long as the vision is common, then the alliance will prosper. But eventually it's, the alliance, if the objectives are met from either party's point of view, then they can go their separate ways. And that's the enormous flexibility that alliances and partnerships have over other complicated governance mechanisms. Like there are acquisitions and mergers, which would also give you access to complementary resources, but they're not so flexible. It's very hard to liquidate an acquisition or a merger. So the advantage of alliances and partnerships is that they enable close cooperation, but they also have the flexibility in a very dynamic and turbulent environment. If the environment changes, then the alliance could be terminated and then the companies could go their separate ways. What's different from an acquisition or a merger is that the independence of the two companies entering into an alliance are maintained. Their independence is maintained. When you have a merger, then the identities of the independent companies disappear. So those were very good examples. Thank you for sharing them. Are there any other topics that people want to bring up in the chat box with regard to alliances? There's also so many alliances and partnerships in the area of distribution and marketing. So let me think of a good example of that. Well, all the app developers, Apple for their iPads. The iPad is quite a important business to business product in certain industries like healthcare. A lot of the doctors and nurses have specialized software that they can write case histories about patients and retrieve them later on from a database. So Apple has alliances with IBM to sell into the healthcare industry. IBM is the big consulting company that has a very flourishing healthcare consulting practice. IBM salespeople call on hospital administrators every day, whereas Apple has been mainly strong in consumer markets. They don't know much about the B2B market. So Apple has an agreement with IBM to sell into vertical industries like healthcare and others. So that's an example of a distribution and marketing alliance using, for the technology product. Okay. Any closing thoughts on chapter 5 that you would like to talk about? Otherwise, let's go to chapter 6, which is about marketing research in high-tech markets. So that's the topic now open for discussion. If there's any particular techniques that interested you, you would like to learn more about, please do enter it into the chat box. So now we are going on to the next chapter, chapter 6 on marketing research. I would like to give you a chance to raise any issues that you found interesting or maybe a little bit confusing. If you could go to the chat box and enter your comments or questions, I'll be happy to address them. And if you don't, then I will get into some conceptual material about the chapter just to recap the important aspects. Okay, thank you, Sami, for your question. Should market research be outsourced or is it better to do internally? That's an excellent question. There are pros and cons of each approach. The most important benefit of outsourcing the marketing research is that you have an objective third party to be able to conduct the research. You know, the problem with all of marketing research is that the real benefit is that it has to affect decision making. So when managers don't know which way to go on a decision, and they get some research that helps them to make the decision, that's the real valid use of marketing research. However, in a lot of practical cases, I've seen that the management or the manager has already made his or her decision on what direction they want to go in, and then they just want to look for the marketing research to validate their decision, and that's an abuse of marketing research. If you've already decided to go in a particular direction, then the marketing research is not at all necessary. And in fact, that creates the conflict with the outside uh, agency if you've outsourced it. So again, the main benefit of doing outsourcing is that you have an objective consultant who is not concerned with the day-to-day, implications of the decision. They are reporting on the data in a dispassionate, objective way. And the downside of outsourcing is that it costs a lot to hire a good marketing research consultant. And so I would say that if you're a small company with some limited resources, like a startup, then you, by all means, these are quite simple techniques that we've described in chapter 6. And there's a certain protocol that will ensure their validity. If you follow it, there's no reason why you can't do it internally. So thank you, Sami, for your question. Please, if there are other topics or issues that you would like to ask about in terms of marketing research, feel free to put them here in the chat box. I will now go into this particular visual where I hope you're able to see this. On the horizontal scale, you have this continuum from incremental innovation to breakthrough innovation. This axis is one of measuring uncertainty. On the left side, we know that incremental innovation, the customers know what their needs are. Typically they'll say, I want more battery power in my smartphone, or I want a larger screen. Those things are familiar to customers, so they will tell you what they need. But when you go towards the right hand side of this figure, uncertainty increases, all kinds of uncertainty, market uncertainty, technology uncertainty, competitive volatility. At the extreme right, when you have a breakthrough innovation, the customer doesn't know anything about that. Because the technical solution comes before what the customer's experiences. And so what this diagram tells you is that on the left side, where there's low uncertainty, all your traditional marketing research techniques work. Things like focus groups, survey research. On the left side, all of these techniques are based on self-report. The consumer is telling us what they need, and it's valid because it is within their experience. On the extreme right, when there's a very new breakthrough or radical innovation, then there's no research that can help you. You need the judgment or intuition of a visionary leader like a Steve Jobs or Richard Branson or Elon Musk. These are people who have some intuition about what the future market is going to need. And that's where they bring out the radical or breakthrough innovation without doing any marketing research. Now, within these two extremes, you have some moderate levels of uncertainty. And that's where most of the techniques that we describe in this chapter, like customer visits, empathic design, lead users, QFD, prototype testing, they are all based on observation of behavior, not on self-report. And our kind of thesis in this chapter is that when there is high uncertainty, then observation of behavior is a better marketing research technique than self-report, because consumers can't really give valid responses when there is moderate uncertainty. So that's the reason why we introduce all these techniques: customer visits, empathic design, and so on. Now, we could go into each of these techniques one by one, starting with a customer visit. So the first thing to note is that a customer visit is not a sales call, nor is it a business development call. It is purely a customer research motivated call. What do we mean by that? It's not that the sales calls are not important, or business development meetings are not important. Sure, they are. But in terms of a program, this particular tool has to be budgeted in advance and put into the marketing plan. So companies will have to decide, maybe every quarter we will visit three customers. Okay. And then there has to be a budget for it. Why? Because there has to be a cross-functional team that travels to the customer and does the observation. So it requires, investment in travel. Also, if they're leaving their day-to-day jobs and then they're going to do this customer visit, then somebody else back in the office has to cover their work. So you might have to have additional headcount in order to fund this program. So you need a cross-functional team, And what's the rationale for a cross-functional team is that you have a broad interface where communication is facilitated with your counterparts in the customer organization. So engineers talk to engineers on the customer side, accountants talk to accountants, salespeople talk to salespeople. And so there is a better, richer interface and a better communication between the marketing company and the customer company. So thank you, Jenny, for your question. Can we consider these research methods to apply for B2B and B2C? Yes, very much so. Most of the examples perhaps are B2B, but consider that, even a toy company which brings out some new toys, take Lego, for example. Lego will let children play with their blocks and videotape them with permission to see what kinds of structures they are building and how long is the attention span that they're able to spend involved in that kind of construction. So that is a similar type of observation. So you can go into customers' homes, or you can invite the customers to come to a lab or a central place, and you can observe consumers using this technology. Apple, before it launched its retail stores back in 2001, the company-owned retail stores. There are flagship Apple company-owned stores in so many cities of the world. Before they launched, there was actually an unmarked building in Silicon Valley where the prototype of the retail store was tested for 2 years. And Steve Jobs brought in lots of retailing experts as well as lots of consumers to figure out what's the best layout. And they did some pretty innovative things. Prior to the Apple store, all expensive electronics were kept behind locked cases. And if a customer wanted to try something, they would ask for the salesperson or the retail person to open it and give it to them to try out. Apple turned that on its head. It said that let's put all the devices out in the open and give it a very open feel, and then people will be drawn more to it to try it out. And that has worked extremely well for them. So again, Jenny, I believe these techniques are applicable to both B2B and B2C. Right. Now, the thing is that when you go on this customer visit program, it's not just to do some PowerPoint presentation in a conference room. You have to go and see how users are using your product or service. Then you will get the good insights. And also, you will get good insights by not just visiting your existing customers, but you have to visit all different kinds of customers. The most difficult customers are your competitors' customers. You might have lost an order to them, but if you go back to them and say that, we're sorry, we didn't meet your expectations this time, but we want to find out where we were deficient so that we can go back and improve our products and services, then maybe they will give you an appointment. So you have to visit many different kinds of customers to get the best insights. And so the example that I've used in my video, which you might have seen, is that when the Toyota Corolla was launched, Toyota sent a couple of ethnographic researchers to dealers in 20 different cities in the United States. And they wanted to observe how potential customers or prospects, how they do the test drive. So, when there's a test drive, the prospect gets into the driver's seat. The salesperson from the dealership sits in the front passenger seat, and the ethnographers from Toyota sat in the back seat. When they were doing the test drive, the prospect made all kinds of positive comments that they liked the comfort and the handling of the car and so on. But when they came back to the dealership and parked the car, got out and closed the door, they were making some kind of face that, there's something that they don't like. And this was a pattern of behavior repeated quite consistently across the 20 cities in which Toyota did these observations. And so finally the researchers asked these customers, what is it that's bothering you when you park the car and close the door? They said, this might be a subcompact economy car costing only $12,000, but somehow the sound of the door closing doesn't give us an assurance of safety. And this kind of insight Toyota would probably not have been able to get from a focus group or a survey, because they were observing those non-verbal expressions. They could get this type of deep insight, and then they went back to their R&D engineers and said, re-engineer the door so that it has a deeper solid sound, which is better than the current metal clangy sound. And that helped to improve the sales of Toyota Corolla. So that's the customer visit program. Then a similar technique is called empathic design. So this comes from these two words. Empathy means putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, or actually putting yourself in the mind of the customer. So you understand their pain points, and then you design your products and services to improve this. Now, what's the difference between customer visit and empathic design is customer visits, you have a cross-functional team that does the observation. And the downside of that is that sometimes the customer is wary about privacy or confidentiality, and it's also very obtrusive if you have a team of large number of people going into the customer site. So in empathic design, the actual observation is delegated to maybe one person in the team, and you use a lot more technology to record the observations. Video is the best, but if you don't have permission to take video, you can record audio. And if you can't record audio, then you make some graphics, you do some drawings about the observation. So that's really what is different. But in spirit, empathic design also requires observations of users, and you can get many different types of insights. When do people use the product? So the example of a trigger of use goes back to the company called NTT Docomo, which is the Japanese telecom services provider, just like Telia in Finland. So, at the beginning, when we had only feature phones for voice calls, NTT Docomo did a study of teenage behavior, and they wanted to see when do young people use their cell phones to make voice calls. And they found some important use cases. One is when people are lost. I'm supposed to meet somebody. Where are you? Can't find you. That's when you call them. Or when you have downtime, you're waiting at a bus stop, you're waiting at a train station, you have a few idle moments, you call a friend and say, hi, how are you doing? And they found that in a 24-hour day, even heavy users among teenagers are using only about 2 hours of voice calls. Then they had this idea, what if, the voice call is very intrusive, it interrupts people. What if we could have some other form of communication like email, which would be asynchronous? And that's how the idea for text messages came about, is that, while they are, and that's what increased the usage of the network, is even when they were not making voice calls, they could just text message and say, hi, how are you, to any friend, and that increased. That was the trigger of that trigger of making that available increased the usage of the service. Unarticulated user needs, coping strategies, new usage situations, customization, intangible attributes. Can any of you share any experiences that you might have had where you had this kind of coping strategy? The thing was not perfect when you bought it, but there was a shortcut or workaround the problem. Anybody can share any experiences? Or how are you using some technology product in a new usage situation? Have you done any customization? Are any intangible attributes important to you? So I want to pause and give you a chance to share some of your experiences. I see a question from Lisa. How can you make customer visit programs in practice? So first, Lisa, you have to plan for it. So it has to be in the marketing plan with a budget. You have to make a plan that next annual year, I'll visit so many customers by quarter. And so then you have to contact those customers in advance, request permission, make it clear this is a research visit. There has to be no sales agenda, okay? Because you want to keep that separate. If the customer feels that you want an appointment to make a sales pitch, they may refuse to participate. But if you make the appeal that this is just like, this is for research purposes to improve our products and services, and you may have to incentivize them. You might have to say that from if we learn something from you and we do improve our products and services, then you will be the first to get to try the product. We might involve you in beta testing, right? And we could even offer you some kind of discount when the product is ready. So you have to, when it comes to practicalities, you have to motivate and incentivize the customer to participate. So yes, the customers would get some benefits because they will tell you what kind of problems and pain points they have, and you must commit to saying that we will bring out some improvements and try to meet your needs better. And then it's always good to offer some incentives, like you'll get to be the first to try the product, or we will give you a 10% discount on the list price, something like that. So it has to be practical. Any of you have any examples to share of the kinds of things that this slide talks about, where you might have had some kind of coping strategy for a new tech product that you adopted, or how are you using it for some new situations? Any customization that you're doing? It's fairly common. Okay, if not, I'll go to the lead users next. So lead users are those customers who are using your product under extreme conditions. For a lot of really innovative breakthrough technologies, the military is the lead user because they're often using the technology in warfare under extreme conditions, perhaps high temperatures, high altitudes. So that's one example. In automobiles, race car drivers are considered lead users because they use the acceleration and the braking and so on under such extreme conditions. So if you can tap into the lead user, they can have a lot of insights about improving your products and services. And again, they have an interest in helping you because they would be getting the products or services that they need. The interesting thing about lead users is that sometimes they are not within your existing customer base. You might have to find them. So for example, if you are Virgin Galactic and you want to get some insights from lead users, there haven't been a lot of current customers of that yet, and so you might have to reach out to astronauts from NASA or other companies. You might have to tap into fighter jet pilots in the Air Force. You might have to tap into material scientists doing cutting edge research on new materials. So that's where the customers, the lead users may not be your current customers, but they are experts in their field. And so very often the way to get them together is to organize some kind of educational seminar where they are happy to come as invited guests, and you might have to pay them an honorarium, but they're happy to participate and give you those kinds of insights. And sometimes you have to use this technique called the Delphi technique, where even the experts don't have a clear idea about some of future conditions. You might, for example, Virgin Galactic might want to know how many years is it going to take for the price of a flight to come down per person from $200,000 to $2,000. Then the Delphi technique is every expert gives first a point estimate on how many years that might take. Then that is shared with everybody else in the panel. then they discuss or justify why they said that point estimate. And then they have a second round and a third round. And through these iterations, there's some convergence on a single point estimate across the different panelists. So that's how you try to get the insights from lead users. Now, this point is also very important, that you're not going to develop the product only for lead users, because the number of lead users is very small and they can pay very high prices. In basketball, we know that Michael Jordan was a lead user for Nike athletic shoes, basketball shoes, and he can afford to pay maybe $1,000 for a pair of new shoes, but the mass market is not going to be able to afford that. So you have to dumb down the innovation. You have to dilute the performance that the lead user has suggested and bring it down to an appropriate cost and price level, like maybe $150 for a pair of athletic shoes. So the lead user research has this caveat that, yes, you will get a lot of good ideas for increasing performance and functionality, but then you might have to dilute the product a bit in order to appeal to the mass market. So I still don't see any questions or comments. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about quality function deployment and the Kano concept. So QFD is a broad set of tools available to improve quality of products and services. And the overall, the issue is, how do you provide a bridge between the voice of the customer, which is a marketing responsibility, and then product design, which is more of an engineering responsibility. Take the example of the sound of the door closing for the Toyota Corolla. We know that customers didn't like the sound of the door closing. So think of the voice of the customer as columns in a spreadsheet. Okay, one of the columns is, don't like the sound of the door closing. It's so qualitative, it's so abstract. Then on the rows, you have the engineering specifications. You might say that the engineers will come up with, if we want to create a deeper sound, we have to put more metal or material into the door. So we need to increase the weight of the door. We need more steel of a higher grade and quality, and so on and so forth. And there has to be a tight correlation between the rows and the columns. So that's what the overall technique of QFD is. Now, one of the tools in the toolkit of QFD is called the Kano concept. And that's what I want to go into next. It's a very nice way to look at decomposing your product into different levels of quality from a consumer's perspective, and then relating that to their satisfaction. So in this diagram, you have satisfaction along the vertical axis, and then you have product attribute, the magnitude of the attribute on the horizontal axis. And any product, whether it's a smartphone, a laptop, even a simple thing like a whiteboard marker, it will have all these three levels of quality. The orange line is called the must be quality. You can see that the property of the must be quality is that if you have it, it doesn't add much to satisfaction. But if you don't have it, then it's a huge negative. So this is what we call as expected or must be quality. That is, the customer knows what they want, but they don't necessarily tell you, because they take it for granted that you must know how basic this is. Examples would be durability. we expect a smartphone must last at least 3 years without breaking. Or we must have some battery power for at least 5 hours per day. So this is often called the minimum viable product. If you don't have this, don't even think of launch. Just go back and do better R&D to improve the product. A second level of quality is the blue line, which is called one-dimensional quality. It has the property more is better. And the customer knows about it and they speak about it. So now this is no longer just a threshold as in the must be quality. Here the customer is saying there's no limit to how much battery power I can have. I want 24 hours and more. So it has that property. Or in terms of screen size, I want a larger and larger screen. Even prices along this is that the lower the price, the better the satisfaction. So it's inverted, but cost and price are also along this line. And then finally, you have the green level of quality, which is called attractive quality. It surprises and delights the customer. I also like to call it the wow factor. You can see the property. The more you have of this attribute, the higher the levels of satisfaction. And an example of this would be the first touch screen on the Apple iPhone in 2007. It wowed almost everybody. So now you can see that there are 3 levels. Every product can be decomposed. The orange line is the baseline. If you don't have it, don't launch. The blue line tells you the current level of competition. All the players, Apple, Samsung, Google, they're all trying to improve things like higher battery power and larger screens. And then the wow factor is where the creativity lies. Any company that brings out the green as a pioneer, the first one to do that, has a competitive advantage until the competition catches up. So Apple had the touchscreen advantage for maybe 6 to 12 months, and then everybody else came up with a touchscreen. So although this is a static diagram at one point in time, you can see that if you extend the time dimension, the green line will eventually become the blue line, and the blue line will get absorbed into the orange line. And therefore, it tells you that in terms of product design, the real challenge and the real opportunity is to come up with what's going to be the next green line, what's going to be the next killer feature or functionality that will wow the marketplace. So, if you've understood this, can you give me some examples, more recent contemporary examples of companies that might have launched things that illustrate the wow factor or the green line? I would like you to offer some examples of your own. What is it in your shopping experience that you might have wowed you recently in the last, say, 3 or 6 months? Anybody had an experience like that? Yes, thank you, Maya, for your response. The mobile payments. Yeah, do you remember when in Finland there used to be the swiped cards, credit cards, and then you went to contactless cards, right? Where you just bring your Nodia card close to the terminal, and then it without asking you for any other signature or password, I think up to 25 euros, your payment is approved quite easily. This summer I was in Finland in August, and I had my new Apple Watch, and Nordea Bank actually integrated with Apple Pay. So I was able to go into all the cafes and shops that accept the contactless payment and just zap this close to the terminal. And the most of the retailers went wow, because I was one of the first people in their store to use that Apple Pay in conjunction with my Nordea bank card. So those are the examples where I literally saw people say, wow. So those are examples, and thank you, Maya, for bringing up the mobile payment. I think even my example this summer is that it can still be mobile payment, especially with Apple Pay, can be a wow. Anybody else would like to share any examples of wow factors? So remember that the wow factor requires a lot of creativity and brainstorming, and also quick implementation before anybody else can copy the idea. Okay, so I think I've covered most of the important aspects in this particular chapter. Now I would like to go to the next chapter. So that will be chapter 7, Understanding High-Tech Customers. So let's move on to this chapter and tell me, are there particular topics that you found of interest or that were not so clear? If you need any examples of anything, I'm happy to go over that. So please go to the chat box and tell me what is it in chapter 7 that you would like to have some discussion on. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, thank you, Anna, for letting me know you can see my screen. So please, are there any topics that you would like to talk about in chapter 7? Otherwise, I will get into some topics that I think are quite important, just to highlight some of those areas. But first, I want to give a chance to you. Are you seeing chapter 6 slides? I'm sorry. Let me rectify that. Now I hope you can see my Google document, which has chapter 7, Understanding High-Tech Customers. We are on that. Thank you, Arla. So anybody would like to ask about any topics in chapter 7? Now I hope you can see my slides on chapter 7. So let's just briefly talk about the purchase process. This may be something that you're already familiar with from other marketing courses that you have taken previously. Simple, starting with problem definition, problem recognition, then information search, evaluate alternatives, and make the purchase and post-purchase evaluation. So what we need to focus on is how has this changed in the current technological environment that has existed in the last 20 years since the World Wide Web. It's very clear that information search for most of us, it originates on the web, where we like to do a Google search, or we like to go to a company's website and check out their products and services and find as much information as possible. In evaluating alternatives now, we can download white papers, we can look at reviews and blogs, and we can even participate in webinars that are offered by the marketeer. We make a purchase decision and then post-purchase evaluation. So in terms of evaluating alternatives, there's been two trends that have been quite important. So one is that the role of design in evaluating technology products has got very elevated. Before 1997, all personal computers were either black or beige in color. Steve Jobs, when he rejoined Apple, he questioned the conventional wisdom and said, why do personal computers have to be only black and beige? And so he introduced, with his own intuition, without doing any marketing research, he introduced the candy-colored iMacs. You remember those? They were transparent plastic monitors, blueberry, peach, strawberry. They had nice colors. So those are the kinds of examples which illustrate how important the aesthetics and the look and feel is. Ease of use is another important thing. In all technology products, we can benefit from simpler ease of use. And now, many universities are actually incorporating all these three areas. So traditionally, the technology factors have been taught by engineering departments. The business factors have been taught by the business schools. And then the human factors, they're taught by now industrial design departments. And companies like Apple and Samsung and Google and so many others, they're hiring lots of industrial designers. Probably the most famous industrial designer is Johnny Ive at Apple. He joined a long time ago, even before 1996, before Steve Jobs retook the reins at Apple. And he's become such a celebrity. And it is said that Steve Jobs has ensured that before he passed, Johnny Ives was like an untouchable. He has tenure at Apple for life, that nobody can take his job away. So that's how important design thinking is. And also another aspect of evaluation in most of our consumer decision making is that now consumers are much more sensitive to end of life issues. Is this product safe, and can it be disposed of in a toxic manner? Can we have companies reduce their carbon footprint? So we give now, as consumers, we are giving some extra points to those products and services that are sustainable and have a good effect on the environment. Okay, this is another important framework. You may or may not have come across it in previous courses, but this tells you that at the level of adoption and diffusion of a new technology product or an innovation, what are the factors that what are the design factors that most affect whether something will get quickly adopted and diffuse across a population? So relative advantage is, what benefit does your product or service have over some next best alternative? And remember, the next best alternative is not always a brand or a competitor. You might compare relative advantage compared to the inertia of a consumer who's not doing anything currently. So, this is often asked, like these things, the smartwatch, is there really any advantage? Because a lot of people can manage without one. They're happy with whatever existing watch they have, and some younger consumers just use their smartphone as a digital watch. So there's a difference in perception. Does it really have a relative advantage? And if it doesn't, then it's going to take a longer time to get adopted and diffuse. The second factor is compatibility, which is not just technical, interoperability or standards, but it's compatibility with the user's needs and values. So, hybrid cars like the Prius have a very high compatibility with consumer behavior of driving petrol-based cars. But a fully electric car has much lower compatibility with the way we drive petrol cars, because it takes a long time to charge the battery, and then there's range anxiety. It doesn't go very far. So the hypothesis would be that electric cars will take a much longer time to get adopted across a population compared to hybrid cars, which, at least in the US now, hybrid cars have become mass market accepted. Complexity is inversely related to ease of use. Trialability is, can you try out the product on a limited basis? Ability to communicate. Very often we can explain what our experience has been with the product, especially if it relates to your friend's experience. If I have a new shaving system, I can tell my friends, oh, this gives me a very smooth shave, and they will understand it. But just think about space tourism, somebody who goes up to, and comes down again. How would that person explain what's the feeling of weightlessness to anybody else? And then observability is, can the benefits be visible to others even if you don't explain them or communicate them? And this is all arranged in order of magnitude. So lots of empirical studies have been done which show that relative advantage has the biggest impact on adoption and diffusion, and observability has the least. And this is a very robust framework. Okay, now the most important concept, I believe, in this chapter is that theory of crossing the chasm. And for that, I'm going to use this particular diagram. This is a segmentation by consumers' time of adoption. So along the horizontal axis is really time. Innovators are the small percentage of people who adopt very early, as soon as the product is available. Early adopters adopt next, then come early majority, late majority, and laggards. Laggards adopt last. Now, across many different empirical studies, some percentages have been arrived at. So the generalization is that innovators are about 2.5% of the population. Early adopters are about 13.5%. So both innovators and early adopters constitute about 16% of the population. The vertical axis is the percentage of the population. So innovators and early adopters are called the early market. And because this figure is symmetric around the center, the laggards are also 16%. So the two together constitute 32%. What's left in the middle is the mass market, which is 68%, consisting of early majority 34% and late majority 34%. So this is an important piece of data. Now, these segments have different characteristics or their attitude towards technology and risk. Innovators, they are technology enthusiasts. They will embrace the latest and they are not price sensitive. Visionaries are similar to the innovators, but they like to wait a little longer. Early majority will only buy for very tangible reasons. How does this benefit me from an economic standpoint or an efficiency standpoint? How does it help to increase my revenue or lower my costs? Late majority, they are technology averse. And the laggards are skeptics. They will wait a long time. There's no point in really targeting them. Now you can see there's a little white space indicated by those black curly brackets, is that there is a communication gap between any two segments. But the widest communication gap is between the early market and the mass market, between the early adopters and the early majority. And this communication gap is because these two segments are most different from each other in terms of their attitudes. And the communication gap arises because the people in the early majority will not accept word of mouth referrals from the early adopters. You know, within any segment, there is good word of mouth referral, but across the segment, there is a lot of suspicion. And that's why that particular chasm is pretty wide. And technology marketeers should know that it is not always necessary that every product or service will encounter the chasm. No, there are certain hit products. You know, when Apple came out with its iPod, the first digital music player, it went smoothly across to the top. But when you know this theory, you should not be alarmed if sales increase initially and then drop. Or if there's a long period of flat, low, there's no growth for a long period of time, then that indicates a chasm. So one has to recognize the symptoms of being in the chasm. And here are some of the symptoms. You know, when you're marketing to innovators and early adopters, your marketing strategy has to be very customized. There are bugs in the product, and the innovators will bring those up and tell you need to customize it for them. So it's a very direct one-on-one strategy. But once you continue with that and you suddenly see that customers are not interested in customization anymore, they close the door. That tells you your marketing strategy is not working anymore. What was successful with the early market is no longer successful with the mass market. So revenue grows initially and then tapers off or remains flat for a long period of time. The key management personnel, they lose morale. And then if you've raised any venture capital or angel investment, those investors start breathing down your neck and saying, when will you turn cash flow positive? So once you've recognized that your product or service may be in a chasm, you have to get out of it. Can any of you give me an example of a product or service that currently is in the chasm? So just to test your understanding, give me an example of a product or service that is currently in the chasm. No, nobody is able to give an example. So I would say that the electric car, all electric, fully plug-in, is very much in a chasm. The estimates in the US are it's about 1% market share. And how much percent do you need to cross the chasm? About 20%, because 16% is the early market. You want to cross, it has to be more than 16%. And the estimates currently are that we will reach 20% of all car market in the US for electric cars in another some 15 years. So you can see how long it's going to be low growth. So that would be an example. The good news is that there is a strategy to get out of the chasm, and it's a two-step strategy: identify a beachhead and develop a whole product solution. So what's a good beachhead? A good beachhead is a small niche in the mainstream market, in the mass market. So it doesn't belong in the early market. You've say fallen into the gap, and you need to have a foothold on the top of the cliff in order to pull yourself up. That first place is the beachhead. So it is the segment that has a very compelling reason to buy your product. They are the ones who see the most appeal. And then the second is they must provide good word of mouth referrals into adjacent segments. Here is the bowling alley analogy. The beachhead is segment 1 with application 1. To take my favorite example of the Segway, the two-wheeler that you can see a lot of tourists now in most of the major cities. They have these companies offering the tours on the Segway. Initially, it was launched, as a mass market product for $8,000, and it fell into the chasm because the mass market was not ready. Then what did they do? Segway actually approached police officers as the beachhead, because police officers have this concept of community policing where they like to mingle with people in the neighborhood, either on foot or on bicycle. But then the Segway gave them some curiosity element, at least in the US, in cities like New York. When people saw a police officer on a Segway, they would come up and say, "Oh, hi, this is so cute, Can we look at it? What is it? Please explain it to us." Now, once the police are very visible in their uniform. So the second segment was like other public workers, the postal workers. Segment 3 were the airport workers, and then so on. Eventually, they got to these tourism companies. So that's what a beachhead does. Along the left of this diagram, segment 1 provides good references for segment 2. Segment 2 provides good references for segment 3. And then, of course, the customer's needs are not satisfied with just one application or product. So you have to develop other applications and products. And that's how you try to go over to the mainstream market. So this explains, if you get good traction in the bowling alley, you will then get into the growth stage. In the growth stage, you have a challenge which is inside the tornado. It's a capacity problem. You have to increase your manufacturing and distribution. You have to scale up. And not all companies are able to do that seamlessly. But if you do that well, then you get into Main Street. So my colleague Sana has provided another example for a beachhead smart skincare market, which we can look at. I'm not going to do that now because we're running into a bit of a time constraint, but please do look at that since it's in the chat box, and I will do the same after my lecture. So let me pause here and see if you've completely grasped the nuances of this theory of crossing the chasm, or would you like to ask any questions or make any comments and observations from your experiences? Okay, there's a good question here from Sana. If I understood right, you need to approach early majority different than innovators and early adopters. That's right. How do you do this in practice? Can you still look appealing in the eyes of the innovators, early adopters after reaching the big public? No, I don't think that you can still look appealing in the eyes of the innovators or early adopters, because when you want to cross the chasm, you have to make certain changes in your product or service. You might have to make it more user friendly. You might have to dilute the performance. You might have to lower the price. And so the innovators and early adopters might feel offended. But guess what? They've already bought the product. So they're passé. And so I would say that, you don't need to worry about as much the innovators and early adopters. Of course, you still need to offer them some customer service, but your focus really has to change. The main shift in strategy is to go from customized products, which were important for the early market, and then try to build a more standardized product that has less uncertainty associated with it, because it's only by lowering the uncertainty that you will be able to cross the chasm that consumers are hesitating to buy. So Jenny's question is, in some cases the reason to buy is there, but consumers don't understand or recognize it yet. Yes, absolutely. And so Jenny, the messaging has to perhaps change. Initially, when you were addressing the innovators and early adopters, you might talk a lot about the technology specs, the bits and bytes and clock cycles and all of these things that are appealing to innovators and early adopters. But then to cross the chasm, your message has to be more, what are the economic benefits of the product? Why you must give the early majority a good reason to buy. And maybe it's there, but they have to be made more aware of it. So you might have to, bring that latent need up to the surface. Again, I remember very clearly, when the iPhone was launched, a lot of my friends used to use at that time BlackBerry. That was the standard, where there was a physical keyboard, and they said, "Oh, I don't like the touch screen. It's bothersome. I love my physical keyboard on the BlackBerry." But guess what? Apple was able to demonstrate, and that's where some of these Apple stores played a big part, because people came in and tried out the touch screen and they said, wow, it's so much more easier and convenient to type on a virtual keyboard is quite fast. And you can do it with just one hand instead of, needing both your thumbs to do this. And Sana's comment is over here. also, as we remember that the key reason for innovators to adopt the technological novelty at the point you are approaching early majority, the novelty aspect is already gone. So in that sense, you're not annoying them. They are already waiting for something novel. Yeah, I think the innovators and early adopters, they know that within the next cycle, you will come up with some more innovation. So they're happy with what they have. Attitudinally, they might look down on the early majority for diluting the product, but they will again wait for the next cycle and the new announcements in the next year. So thank you, Sana, for those good comments. Anybody else has any questions or comments or sharing of experiences for crossing the chasm? If not, let's go to our final chapter. So chapter 8 is about technology and product management. Do you have any issues that you would like to bring up with regard to the topics in this chapter? You're welcome to do that now by going to the chat box. Now I hope you're able to see the PowerPoint for chapter 8. We're on the topic of technology and product management. This is a very practical chapter for those who are looking to do, things like product management, program management, and so on. So please do enter any comments or questions you might have. What is it that you would like to discuss more in the next 20 minutes? Anything that you're curious about? So, in terms of technology, the most important thing is to try to anticipate and predict which technology trends are robust and which might actually face the chasm and take a long time to get accepted by the mass market. So here we talk in this chapter about how important the transition to digital technology is across so many different industries. And also there is a very robust trend towards convergence. Convergence is of great value to individual consumers like you and me because we get more performance and functionality at a lower price. And then if you look at all technology management issues, this is a good way to organize it. This is called a technology map or a roadmap. It has 4 stages. In stage 1, you look internally inside the company and take stock of all your technology portfolio. What are you good at? What are the knowledge, skills, and tools that you have inside that make you a very strong company? For example, Honda's core competence is in internal combustion petrol engines, small engines. Now, once you've taken a stock of what technologies are in your internal portfolio, you look outside and you try to look at what are some of the emerging technology trends. Currently, I think you would all agree that there's a huge trend in artificial intelligence being applied across so many different industries. So every company needs to now ask this question: how is artificial intelligence going to affect my business in the future? And if you find that you don't have AI capabilities within your internal technology portfolio, then you have to go to stage 2. How do you get that? How do you get access to AI technology? You know, the first example that Sana put up about the Walmart Microsoft alliance is an excellent example where Walmart has realized that they don't have AI capability themselves. So instead of internal development or buying, they will co-develop that capability with Microsoft's help, right? Now, once you've got that new technology, then you have to decide how do you integrate it into your services, and then what do you want to sell? You know, Amazon has made such a killing in revenue and profits because all of the things that it has made internally with regard to its own, infrastructure, it is now making that available in terms of AWS, Amazon Warehousing Services, or Amazon Web Services to any other company that wants to use its cloud infrastructure. So it is able to offer what it was using internally to the outside. So number 3 is a continuum. You can just license out what your know-how is, or you can build intermediate products, or you can develop a final fully commercial product and sell it. And it's good to have different revenue sources, because if there's a recession and any one product market gets hit worse, you'll have diversified across different revenue streams. And then we have ongoing product management issues. There's product design or product architecture in terms of platforms and derivatives. Sometimes you have to kill projects that are in development. And then how do you protect your intellectual property? So I want to go to a question that Sami has asked. Do you have any examples of killed or cannibalized new products? So the cannibalized new products is easier. Let's take that up first. You know, when when Apple launched iPhone in 2007, it had a very good cash cow, which was the iPod. The iPod was launched in 2001, the iPhone in 2007. When the iPhone was launched, it had 3 important functionalities. You could make voice calls, it was an internet browser, and you could play music. Do you see how the convergence of these 3 on one platform was a threat to the iPod? Because the iPod was a standalone music player, it couldn't do anything else. So Apple made a conscious decision that it's okay for us in 2007 to launch the iPhone, which might cannibalize the iPod, but it's fine because the margins on the iPhone are much higher than the margins on the iPod. Further, it's probably the same iPod users who are going to upgrade to the iPhone. Now, it took them almost 8 years before the iPod was officially, Apple said it will not support it anymore around 2015. So it did last quite a long time, but eventually I think the iPod, at least many of the initial models have been discontinued now. So that's an example of Apple cannibalizing its old products with its new products. And then there are examples of projects that internally have been killed. Again, the example from Apple is that there were rumors that Apple wanted to produce a autonomous self-driving car of its own in competition with Google. But then they said that they canned the hardware part and they're now only going to do the software for the self-driving cars. So the actual automobile physical part of the project that did get killed within Apple. And there are many examples. We don't hear of them as often because companies don't want to publicly declare that certain projects have been killed. It's all pretty proprietary and confidential information, but it happens all the time. Okay, are there any other topics that you would like to discuss? Thank you, Sami, for your question. Yeah, I want to discuss platforms and derivatives because that has some important strategic implications. Here, family is used in the same sense as a new platform. The characteristic of a new platform is that it has to have significant investment in fixed costs, huge jump in investments, but also the benefits must be very significant for the consumer. So there is some gray area. It's not hard and fast, but managers have to define what's a new family and what's an old family. But you can see that every new generation or family or platform has some average performance in the center. And then you can either have a lower performing derivative or you can have a higher performing derivative. So what's the benefit of a platforms and derivative strategy? One is that because it is so expensive or so the investment is so high, you want to invest in a platform as high performance as your budgets will allow. But having done that, you do want to try to tweak the performance so that you cover the white space in between the two families. You can see these black dots. When you do that, you're as a marketeer, you're getting the ability to do segmentation and discriminating price. So now with basically the same investment, you can tweak it a little bit high to cater to the lead users, and then you can dumb it down a little for the more price sensitive mass market. And what you've done essentially, if you're able to successfully execute this, is you're preventing any new competitor from coming in because you've just offered the whole range of products and services that cover the entire white space of performance. And that's when you get dominance from a company like Intel, which is a master of this particular strategy. Intel really hasn't had a significant competitor in the earlier PC market. They have stumbled with regard to the mobile market because they were a little bit late in offering, less powerful chips which get less hot. They were focusing more on the legacy market of the personal computer, but they have now started offering ARM chips as well. So this is the strategic advantage of platforms and derivatives. Product management, I think that's a really good position in some companies, they might call it program manager or project manager. They're quite similar. Basically, it's the first level at which uh, a young person has general management responsibilities. So you're responsible for things like launching the product, giving demos at trade shows, designing all the collateral for the launch, making sure that all the pieces are in place, like tech support, customer service. So the product manager's job is like, being a general manager. You have a lot of responsibility, but you don't have direct authority over all the different departments. In a large company, it might take, like Hewlett Packard, it might take 10 years to become a product manager. But if you're in a startup, you can get these responsibilities very early. And then people who have this role eventually rise up to become general managers and vice presidents and so on. So, any questions or comments up to this point? So the final topic is one which I'm sure everybody is very interested in. It's intellectual property protection. If you look at the most valuable companies today, they are all tech companies. And I believe the reason is that they have the intellectual, the smarts to keep innovating and doing things that are interesting, that excite people. But remember, in order to have a competitive advantage, you must protect your intellectual property, what's in your head. And there are a number of mechanisms for doing that. So we can talk about patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. So a patent is given for very basic discovery. And it is the highest form of protection because it gives the patent owner a monopoly. You can exclude others from using your know-how. And if you give them permission to use it, then you can extract some payments or royalty for those patents. But it's not easy to get a patent. It has to fulfill 3 criteria. It must be of some use to people in society. It must be something novel, unique. It should not have been published ever before. And further, it should be non-obvious from previous publications. So when you get into hybrid products, very often this does not qualify for being non-obvious. Think of a camera phone. There's patents on camera, there's patents on phone. It's not easy to apply for a patent on the end product camera phone because it's the obvious combination of 2 previous ideas. Now, in technology companies, there is some mixed view on patents. In certain industries like drugs and pharmaceuticals, patent is very important because the products are often chemicals and you can analyze it in the lab and find out how to make something very similar to what a competitor is offering. So you need the patent protection to prevent them from doing that. But in a lot of other tech industries, people prefer not to use a patent because the process of getting a patent is such a public process. The government will say, so-and-so company has applied for this particular patent. Does anyone have any objections? So for 12 to 18 months, your patent application will be made public. And that might clue the competitors on what you're doing. So patents have pros and cons on whether to have it or not. A lot depends on each individual country. Copyright is given for works of art and software. So here it's not the original idea that is copyrighted, but it's the expression of the idea. So works of art, you can, a painting, a sculpture, any software which has a specific code associated with it. You cannot patent the idea of a spreadsheet, but if you have a different way of coding the spreadsheet, even if the look and feel is the same, but the code is different, then you're allowed to copyright it. Copyright is given for 75 years. Now there's so much of classical music that has been around for more than 75 years. There's no more copyright protection. So you can use those in advertisements and so on without taking the permission of the copyright holder, because it's more than 75 years. Trademarks are more like for brand names and logos. They identify the seller, and they're very important in marketing. Again, iPhone, when it was launched, they didn't do their due diligence. The trademark name iPhone was actually owned by Cisco. And after launch, Cisco sent a lawyer's notice to Apple saying, please stop using that. And then Apple had to negotiate an agreement with Cisco and get their permission to call it the iPhone. Nowadays, a lot of companies in the tech sector, and they feel that a trade secret is a better way of protection than patenting. And what does that mean? It's just having normal security arrangements. When someone comes to visit your company, make sure they sign in, they wear a badge, they're escorted only in certain areas. They're not allowed to get into labs or manufacturing easily. You keep all your formulas and things secret. It's very common in Silicon Valley for startups to say, you meet somebody, say an entrepreneur, and ask, what are you doing? They'll say, oh, we have a startup. What does your startup do? Sorry, I can't tell you because we are in stealth mode. Stealth mode means until the product is launched, we're not going to say anything. There are other agreements in place like non-disclosure agreements. If you want to have any discussions with business partners, you make them sign a non-disclosure so they cannot repeat what is said in the meeting to anybody else. Often when we do projects with companies, student projects, we have to get our students to sign non-disclosure agreements. There's also non-compete clauses for senior executives, which say that at the level of a vice president or above, if you leave a company like Google, you cannot join a competitor for at least 12 months. After 12 months, you can, but then the rationale is that your knowledge will be obsolete in another 12 months. So those are ways in which companies try to protect trade secrets. The formula for Coca-Cola is a well-protected trade secret for over 100 years. It's amazing that although it's just chemical analysis, and many competitors have come up with knockoffs which are similar to Coke, but again, I haven't tasted anything that's absolutely 100% Coke from another company, and that is to Coke's credit that it has been able to prevent other people from knowing the exact formula or how to build the taste of real Coke. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today in terms of these 4 chapters: alliances and partnerships, marketing research. Then we went into consumer behavior, and then technology and product management. Anybody have any closing thoughts or comments? So again, I hope that you're keeping up with the readings and with all of the materials and finding it of interest. You should also start, working, especially the people who have signed up for the Amazon video case. Try to organize your groups and start working on that. I hope now you're able to apply some of the concepts from the book and the readings to an analysis of the Amazon case, and that will help you to get a better understanding of applications of the theory. So with that, I want to wish you all a good night in La Piranta. Enjoy the rest of the week, and I will see you here again in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much. Moi moi.